He is one of a select few composers to have 3 shows running simultaneously on Broadway. Already a successful pop composer who'd penned Whitney Houston's hit, Where Do Broken Hearts Go?, his career really took off thanks in part to the success of a couple of guys, Jekyll and Hyde. Add to that a muse in the form of singer Linda Eder, who would one day marry him, and his life would never be the same again. His other hits include Someone Like You, A New Life, and This Is the Moment. Hello, I'm Ernie Manouse. Coming up on InnerVIEWS, our conversation with composer Frank Wildhorn. What's the difference for you between writing popular music and theater music?
Well, first of all, they should be the same, shouldn't they?
I don't know. A lot of people would argue they shouldn't.
That's right. Well, I take issue with that. That's such an interesting conversation to have because certainly in the golden age, in the age of Rodgers and Hammerstein, of Cole Porter, of Gershwin's, that was the popular music of the day. And it's something I kind of talk a lot about because certainly when the popular music of the day, when the vocabulary changed and the youth of the country embraced rock and roll, all the other medias embraced that. Whether you're an advertiser or television, radio, certainly the movies use that music. But there was a time when theater kind of, rounded the wagons up and didn't at all. And there was a real canyon between popular music of the day and the theater. And that's something I've been trying to be a bridge.
Now, trying to be, or is it just natural to write that way? When you started working, did you think to yourself, I'm doing something that's a kickback to the old days of making the popular music, or was it just the way you write?
It's just the way I write. Look, I'm a self-taught musician. I write from the heart. I write from the gut. I feel it, I am not an intellectual composer. I don't try to be. I try to touch the heart. I try to do things that transcend the show and are relevant to our lives and things like that. And I just try to do it as honest and with as much passion as I can do that. That's how I write, whether I'm writing for the ballet, whether I'm writing for Julie Andrews or Molly Hatchet, whether it's Sammy Davis or Hootie and the Blowfish. It's still the same thing. I try to make it always soulful and sensual. Of course, in the theater, the music has enormous responsibility that I don't necessarily have when I'm writing for a Whitney Houston or for a Natalie Cole or a Trisha Yearwood. It's a different set of muscles that I'm using. And the music has a responsibility sometimes to help move the story ahead and give insights into the characters. So you're using different muscles, but it's the same guy writing it. So it's still, I try, to be honest and soulful about all of that.
Do you have to know who you're writing for when you're writing for theater?
When I'm writing for theater? Yeah, you have to know a little bit about the character and where they're going.
The character, the actor that's going to play it.
Oh, well,
does that help?
For me, it does.
Okay.
I'm very, very much into writing for a specific voice and trying to show that voice off. Now, if I was sitting here with 9 other composers from the theater, they'd probably all disagree with me. They write a show, and then they fill in what it is. What I mean? But to me, I want to create a star. I want to do that. I want to give my leads an enormous amount of big emotional songs and material. I think if you do that, the audience pays you back at the end of the evening. And, we've been successful doing that. But that's my background. That's my pop background. Yeah. I wasn't successful in pop if I wasn't writing hit songs for stars or wannabe stars. Otherwise, what am I doing? But I keep that philosophy in the theater as well.
Okay, take me back when it all started. Originally wanted to write songs or wanted to write shows?
Just wanted to write music. Like I said, I was a teenager. I taught myself how to play the piano. I was probably in a band, a couple weeks after that. And I was in Florida on the coast, and it was in the mid to late 70s. It was a wonderful time to be a live musician there because there were so many places to play. So we would play in Coconut Grove, and we played, jazz a couple nights a week. We'd play up in Fort Lauderdale, some great strip clubs, a couple days a week. We played at the place called the Playpen in Fort Lauderdale on the water was where they invented the wet T-shirt. That's the true story. It was a wonderful time to be a musician in Florida, and I'd be playing, jazz on Monday and Tuesday, and I'd be playing, Doobie Brothers covers on, one day, and I'd be playing Stevie Wonder and Earth, Wind and Fire, and all kinds of music, and it was a great time, and it was also a great exposure to all kinds of things, and I was really. I was taught by some wonderful people. I always tried to play with people who were much better than I was and that could teach me things, and I still try to do that.
Well, when you say you taught yourself how to play piano, explain that.
I don't know how. Literally, I would, sit and fool around and stuff. The truth of the matter is I was playing football in high school, okay? And we had this organ in the garage, and we used to have 2-a-day practices. And I would come home from the first practice, and I was so gross. My mom wouldn't let me in the house. So I would go in the pool, dry off, and sit on this beanbag chair. I'm talking 1975 here, looking at like Grand Funk Railroad posters and black lights and stuff. And I would do that until I had to go to the next practice. There's an organ that came into the family, and they put it in my garage. And I started fooling around and stuff. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was making music, I guess. And I was talking to some friends who had a brother that was a musician, and he told me about a guy named John Mohegan, who was a professor at the Berklee School of Music, who had written all these wonderful books on counterpoint and harmony and orchestration. So I read them all just so I knew if I was playing a C13 what it was and what version I was playing it in. Okay, so I cut to the end of the summer. Football season is happening, and one day we had a piano in the house. My mom always played the piano. So I'm sitting one day and I'm playing the piano, and she comes home from shopping, and she walks by and says, "That's really nice. That's really good. Did you do that?" "Yeah." And she walks back into the kitchen, and I hear a big crash, and she dropped the groceries. She came back out and said, "You don't play the piano. You're not a musician. What are you doing?" And I said, "I don't know. I was playing the organ. Now I'm playing here." And she said, "I think you're making music." So I think from the second my hands went on a keyboard, I was writing. I don't remember ever not writing. Even if I was playing other people's music, I was still always, trying to imagine and conjure my own. And like I said, a few weeks later, there was a band, and I thought, well, listen, I was working as a lifeguard for the city of Fort Lauderdale, and I was playing football in high school. And now I was a musician, and they all, of course, were about meeting girls. At the end of the day, that's what in Florida in the 70s, that's what it was always about. So it was a great experience, and I had great memories and a wonderful time, and that's where it all started.
Well, that is so. Now, I assume you can write and read music, then.
I can. I'm not great, and if I actually had to physically write what I write, I would never get anything done because I write a lot. And I just do. I feel it. I get in a zone. It's like shooting jump shots or something like that. If you get in a zone, you get there. So, of course, I always have tape recorders running. And now I have, assistants, and they take my stuff and then they transcribe it. Huh. Because, otherwise I would never get anything done.
Okay, 1980 or so, you have an idea for Jekyll and Hyde.
1979 at USC, John Houseman. Remember John Houseman? Mm-hmm. He took me under his wing at USC. Now, I was not a theater or a music major. I was a history major. But I had whatever it took. I went to his office, and I said, "Listen, I wrote this show when I was in Miami. It's called Christopher. It's like Jesus Christ Superstar Part 8 from a Zen Buddhist point of view." Because, of course, that's what every Jewish kid was into back then. I wrote the book, the music, and the lyrics, and I'm sure it was as awful as I remember. But for some reason, he took a liking towards me, and those years at USC, he produced or directed all of these projects of mine, and we did that. And so what happened is I saw the play Dracula with Frank Langella. And I guess this was like 78, 79. And I thought to myself, wow, they took this kind of Victorian, melodrama, horror thing, and they made it relevant and young and sexy. So let me look at that material. Maybe I can find something within that to do. And I read Jekyll and Hyde. And, if you read the book by Stevenson, there's no women in the book. There's a maid called Mary Riley, but that's it. It was Hollywood that added, the relationships, the romances, etc. And so I saw all the movies, and I read the book, etc. And I thought, as a composer, wow, we can take one guy and give him two totally separate musical points of view. That's a cool idea. Let's explore that. The woman, his fiancée, maybe there's two sides of her as well. So Lucy and Emma, well, if they were born different sides of the track, maybe life would be different. So we took that theme and we kept running with that theme. And we did the first reading of Jekyll and Hyde, I guess, at SC in 1980. And what's amazing about that is the kid that played Jekyll and Hyde in USC in 1980 was a guy named Chuck Wagner, who 10 years later created the part here at the Alley Theater in Houston.
But when that story, and you think about the diversity of the character, the two sides,
right.
Is there a part of you that's those two sides that struggle?
I think
and I'm sure people have asked that a bunch
of course,
times.
but it's in all of us. We all know that, and you let the genie out of the bottle, and how far does that, take you? And, there's the best line to me in Stevenson's book is when the character of Jekyll is talking about Hyde, he now has an awareness that he is Hyde as well. And he says about Hyde, how wonderful is his love of life. Because Hyde doesn't have any of the restrictions that we do. He is a totally free human being, and he doesn't think what he's doing is evil. You know what I'm saying? He's just appealing to his own basest instincts and running with them, with no constraints of society whatsoever. And I thought, wow, again, these are great themes and wonderful things to explore, musically.
So when do you decide, I'm going to keep working on this show? Because it's a long journey now.
Oh, my God.
From 79 till it hits Broadway.
Yes.
And many different productions happen along the way.
Absolutely.
Isn't there a point where you say, okay, I'm done with it, or I finish it? How did you know to keep working it, to keep going back?
You know what? I just don't take no for an answer. I never say die.
Never
is
a
my
chance
motto.
you said, let's try a different project, let's put that away.
No, don't forget. I mean, I wasn't just working on Jekyll and Hyde. My career, certainly in the 80s and early 90s, was in the pop music business, and it was keeping me very busy. But, whatever it was, the magic of the beginning of that, didn't go away. And really what happened was in 1989, a bunch of things happened. I met Leslie Brickus, the great Leslie Brickus, who took me under his wing and taught me much more about life than he did about writing, but became my partner on Jekyll and Hyde. And he wrote the first group of lyrics that he sent back to me from the tape I had sent him. And included in that was This Is the Moment and Once Upon a Dream and Someone Like You and A New Life. And, these lyrics would come in and I'd sit at the piano and play them.
What were the songs before?
Well, I originally wrote the show with a partner of mine at USC.
Right.
And we took it as far as we could, but we could only take it so far. To get to the next step, I needed help. Yeah. And it just so happened that, as the years went on, my partner and I went our different ways. And Leslie came into my life, and he really, brought it to the next step. So that's one of the things that happened. The other thing that happened was there was a TV show called Star Search. And on Star Search, there was this unbelievably beautiful woman who won every single week, who is from a tiny little town in Minnesota called Anoka, I think population 12. And I heard her sing, and I said, well, I want to write, that's the voice I want to write for. And I was writing for everybody, but no one knew who she was. She was just winning these weeks in Star Search. And of course, I'm talking about Linda Eder.
Right.
So that happened about the same time. It was a friend of mine who was a consultant on the show that got us together in the very beginning. And we hit it off first musically, and then, of course, I chased her around the piano, and we got married. But, she became my muse and the voice that we heard. And Leslie fell in love with her as a musician as well. So as we were working on Jekyll and Hyde, we thought, well, we know we wanted one guy to play both parts. So we also thought, because we fell so in love with her, let's have her play both parts. And certainly on the first concept record in '89 with Colm Wilkinson, she does sing both parts. It just became physically impossible to play both parts of the show. And, of course, she had never been on stage anyway. So we were all taking a shot.
Do you remember what you wrote in the letter that you first wrote to her?
The very first letter?
Yeah, that's saying, like, hey, I've seen you on TV. I want you to sing my musical?
No. I remember her first letter to me because she was so innocent about the whole thing and the music business and stuff. And it was a letter kind of telling me, like, I love Stephen King books. This is who I am, kind of a letter. And you fell in love with her. Yeah. How could you not? But, so that's two things. Then the third thing happened later that year. I met a guy named Gregory Boyd, who was about to take over the artistic directorship of the Alley Theater here in Houston. And a friend, Jerry Serlin, a set designer, introduced us. We had a couple of meetings. We hit it off. I played him the original demos of the score. And he said, as he says today, he says he thought two things. What is this show, and who is this girl? Which is what everybody said, at the time, which was great. And he had just taken over the Alley, so I guess now we're in 1990. And he invited me down to his first production, which was Measure for Measure. And it was very sexy, this rock and roll, modern, very hip version of the show, play. And I thought, all right, we have a lot in common here. Classics, rock and roll, sexy, all this kind of stuff that we're looking to do. And I thought, well, this could be great. But I noticed when I came to the theater, I said, how are you going to do a musical? You have no pit. You're not really set up to do musicals. And he said, well, and he had such, to do this. He said, well, you have all this technology that you make records with. What if we bring that into the theater? We don't need a pit. We can put the musicians up here. We can put them there. We can do all of these kinds of things. And it became the most wonderful, creative adventure of my life to this day. No opening night on Broadway or number one song or anything beats the memories of the creative process and the journey. For Linda and I, it was a very romantic time. It was a romantic time in the sense also that we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't even know upstage from downstage or left from right. Greg just kind of nurtured us, and he helped Leslie and I put the book together. He helped me put the music together. He taught us about theater and what it was to do this. And just the process of doing that, you fell in love. And certainly, listen, at that time, I was making a lot more money doing pop music. It was a lot easier. My lifestyle was easier. I wasn't getting, having critics throw arrows at me. It was none of that kind of stuff. It was what it was. But all of a sudden, Greg opened this other world. And I'm a guy, I can't wake up in the morning if I don't have a mountain to try to climb at least. And so he's the reason.
Let me ask about collaborating, though, especially with a project that you've had so close to you for so long. Then these other people start coming in. Oh, you should try this, do that, do that. How do you find it within yourself to know what to accept, and how much do you follow your own vision?
Well, interesting enough, and ironically enough, it's the pop music business that taught me all of that. Because when you're a blue-collar songwriter working for a publishing company, they tell you in the morning, all right, 10 o'clock, you're going to go to Kenny Rogers' producer's house, and you're going to work on a song for him in that musical style and with his people. And then after lunch, you have a meeting with Natalie Cole's people and her producers, and you're going to work in that style. Well, you do that every day, year after year after year. You become, if nothing else, you're not going to make it if you're not a collaborator. So you really learn to collaborate, and you learn to try to write for where all these different people are coming from. It was the best school I could ever have for theater. Yeah. I find it's funny and ironic because when I started in theater and having success, I would always take shots for being the pop guy, and he's not a theater guy. The truth of the matter is it's the pop background that taught me how to write for theater. You write for a 50-year-old country artist in the morning and a 16-year-old African-American artist in the evening, you learn to stretch and you learn to collaborate, and you're dealing with so many people in so many different genres. So I think that's the key to that. And I've always been, when you collaborate, you leave the ego at the door and you just aim for the same thing. Now, that's not easy. That doesn't always happen. And you succeed, you fail. Some mountains you climb, some you don't. But with Greg, and certainly at that time, the combination, the personalities of Leslie, Greg, and I, it was wonderful. And again, that's the reason we wouldn't be here today, because I would be making pop records. I was having a lot of fun doing it, and it was a great life and a great lifestyle, But again, Greg opened that world up. And then the other thing that happened was I said to myself, here I am writing a song for Whitney Houston, or a song for this one, or a song for that one. But in the theater, I can write 25 songs, and I can do it the way I want to do it. And I can still, because of the credibility I had in the pop business, I can still make records of these things. And of course, that's where concept records became part of my life.
Now, there was a point where, and we're jumping, of course, ahead quite a bit, you have 3 shows playing on Broadway at the same time. First composer to do that in 20 years when you do it. What does that say to you? Is that, as much as it's nice to work and it's nice to have successes, but to have 3 on Broadway, do you take pride in that?
Well, of course. How can you not? My parents were happy. They thought their son was doing okay. 60 Minutes was at the house. It was a very heady time. But you don't wake up in the morning thinking, oh, I'm going to have 3 shows on Broadway. You don't do that. You just do the best work you can. A lot of things have to align. Luck has so much to do with all of this stuff. when you write a #1 song, that's might not be the best song you ever wrote, but so many things had to align for that to happen. The right artist at the right time, when nothing else in that genre is out there, when that artist is the priority of the record company, so money is thrown to that. I mean, there's so many things. Same thing here. Jekyll and Hyde, thank God, had a 5-year run, so it was running for a while. And Scarlet Pimpernel came very fast on the heels of Jekyll and Hyde. And then Civil War came on the heels of that. So we had all three, and it was a wonderful time. And it was the streets in New York were ours. We were having a lot of fun. But just as important, or as much as that, is last year we had 3 new shows in Europe running at the same time. Right. We had Rudolph in Vienna and Monte Cristo in Switzerland and Carmen in Prague. And at the same time, Cyrano is opening in Tokyo. And here we are developing Wonderland here, and Havana, which is coming up, and Bonnie and Clyde, which was just in La Jolla. And, every day is an adventure.
If you look at a timeline of your career, it seems like right now you are just on fire creatively. There are so many projects going within the last couple of years, all at once. Mm-hmm. Was there a slow period for you, or were all these being developed all along the same time? They've all just hit at once?
Yeah, I'll tell you, the slow period was after Dracula. Dracula meant a lot to me and opened, I think it was in 2003 or 2004, and was a disaster. It just didn't work. And it took a while to get over that. But what happened was there's a man named Freddie Gershon. Freddie Gershon owns a company called MTI, Music Theater International. They have the second class and international rights to many of the shows that we know, from West Side Story to Fiddler on the Roof, from Les Mis to Wicked. He's the guy. He's kind of like my rabbi in my life. He gives me a lot of advice. And he said, listen, Frank, but from Victor Victoria through Jekyll and Civil War and Pimpernel and Dracula, you had a lot of shows here in New York. You need a break. And they need a break from you, I think, as well. And you are having a lot of success around the world right now with these Jekyll and Hydes. He said, why don't you actually go to them? Go to these opening nights, meet the producers. So I did do that, and I discovered the world out there. Yeah. And what happened was I made relationships with the different producers, and all of a sudden, commissions started coming from around the world. Well, now the career went in a whole other way. So I said, you know what, let me concentrate on this. And by the way, the lifestyle of writing for Europe with 40, 50-piece orchestras and 60 people on the stage, you can't do that here. You can't do that here. And Asia, where Jekyll and Hyde was 6 years in Tokyo, and Jekyll and Hyde is still in South Korea. It's still there. Yeah. I mean, it's been years. And so the world opened up, and that became a new adventure. And while all of that was happening, I started developing some new shows with a different musical vocabulary, which really are the new wave of the shows I'm trying to work on now in America, which is Havana, Wonderland, and Bonnie and Clyde. So, it's all together. Now it's always together, and, it is nuts. Even for me, it's nuts.
Why, this is kind of a guilty pleasure question, kicking back just a little bit. Why do Dracula musicals not seem to make it?
Is that amazing?
There have been a few of them.
Well, there's 3. And the other 2 are written by much more successful guys than I am. I mean, Elton John did Lestat, and Jim Steinman did Dance of the Vampires. Dracula ran the longest. We had, I think, 7-8 months and stuff. But at the end of the day, look, each one of them has a story. I'm sure if Elton and Jim were here, they'd have, the stories of their shows and what happened. My story was I really wrote one show, and that show was financed, and maybe the show that got on Broadway wasn't quite what I originally perceived, and of course that's a long story and a whole other conversation. But look, at the end of the day, you got to take responsibility for it, and it just didn't work. And yet here we are. I bet you there's going to be another slew of vampire things because, from what I understand this year in the top 100 books in the New York Times, there's like 16 vampire stories.
Right. It seems to work, but when they take it to the musical stage, people have trouble finding it.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm done with that. I don't know if I'm, I don't know. I think there's maybe another shot at that. Dracula, by the way, is an enormous success around the world.
Right.
And it's being done in Japan next year, and it's been fantastic in both Switzerland and Germany and in Austria for me. And so we'll see. Yes, we'll see.
Okay, Alice in Wonderland. Mm-hmm. Big movie coming out of it.
Yes.
But you've got yours going.
Yes.
Different take on it, a little different approach.
Well, I only know what I've seen of the clips from Tim Burton's film, and I think he's done his Tim Burton thing, which is fabulous. And, Johnny Depp as the Mad Hatter. I mean, That's brilliant. Our thing is a whole completely different thing. I mean, we use the iconic characters. We owe a great debt to Lewis Carroll. But this started when I was running a division of Atlantic Records. And I first, of course, came up with the idea of making a record, not the show, of how to do this. And so Pink, the artist Pink, I saw as the Mad Hatter. And Carlos Santana was the Cheshire Cat. And Avril Lavigne was Alice. And that's how this project started. I was going to do a concept record. And because of the phantasmagorical nature of Wonderland, you get to go to Wonderland and invent that in your... There are no rules musically. Right. I thought this selfishly is a wonderful thing for me as a composer because I can really do a score here that does go back to my pop roots. I don't ever like doing a pastiche of a style. I don't ever want to do the Broadway version of a style. So if I'm writing, a salsa song, it's the real thing. If I'm writing a big band, it's the real thing. If I'm writing a boy band song, which we have in Wonderland, I'm writing as if I was writing it for Boys to Men or In Sync or something like that. So the Wonderland gave me a wonderful palette to play on. It started there, and then it developed, to where we are tomorrow night. Yeah.
Okay, last thing before I let you go. You're working again with Linda Eder.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, always my muse, always the voice, in my head, and how could it not be? And, we've both taken, journeys together and journeys apart, and I think the musical journeys together have been, they speak for themselves. And, I see how that music has affected people all around the world. I'm very excited. We're going to make some music together, and we are in the studio right now.
Well, you're in our studio right now, and I thank you so much for coming in and talking to us. Fantastic. A pleasure as always.
Absolutely.
Frank Wildhorn.
To order a DVD of this or any episode of InnerVIEWS, please visit HoustonPBS.org.